Well, welcome back everybody to the conference. I'd like to, hopefully everybody is all back in again. It looks like most people are. So I hope you all enjoyed your breakouts as much as I did. It was just incredible to hear from leadership in the community, and the presenters that presented are so involved and so knowledgeable and helped me a lot. I wish I could have heard all of the breakout sessions, but I am going to totally look forward to watching their recordings and to learning from them as well. Thank you all who participated. We are going to now have our final concluding session. We are so lucky to have Carolina Nunez with us, who is a professor at BYU Law School. And to introduce her, I'm going to turn the time over to Audrey Perry-Martin.
Thank you, Jenny. I have the honor of introducing Carolina Nunez, who's our final speaker today. I've had the pleasure of seeing Carolina's amazing leadership in action at BYU Law School, and I've been so impressed with her incredible ability to navigate and lead in very difficult times, just guiding law students and faculty through a pandemic, no big deal. I'm so excited to hear from her today. I know from the students I've taught at BYU that Carolina is an absolute fan favorite at the law school, and for very good reason. She clearly cares deeply for her students and gives them incredible work and service opportunities through the law school. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her incredible resume as well, because I don't want to take up too much of her time. Carolina is the Charles E. Jones Professor of Law at Brigham Young University's J. Reuben Clark Law School. She researches and writes about immigration law, citizenship, and immigrant rights, with a specific emphasis on undocumented immigrants. As part of the Law and Social Change Initiative, she works with colleagues to invite speakers, develop courses, and create opportunities for students interested in law's potential to affect social change and improve lives. Professor Nunez also co-founded the J. Reuben Clark Law School's Refugee and Immigration Initiative, through which law students provide legal assistance to women and children detained in an immigration detention center in Southern Texas. In 2017, second and third year law students recognized Professor Nunez as Professor of the Year. A summa cum laude graduate of the Brigham Young University Law School, Professor Nunez clerked for the Honorable Fortuna P. Benavides of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She subsequently practiced commercial litigation at Stoll Reeves in Salt Lake City and joined the BYU Law faculty in 2008. So we are so excited to hear from her today, and I will turn the time over to you, Carolina.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today. I've been in the opening session, and then just now I've been scrolling through your names and see so many familiar names, familiar faces. So it's great to be with you again, and then lots of new faces and new names that I haven't seen. And it's great to be introduced this way, and hope that we have a chance to get to know each other in other contexts if we haven't met. Let me get my screen shared. All right, hopefully you are seeing my first slide here, stepping up to leadership, or how I learned to get over my insecurities and use my skills to do some good. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And Audrey gave you a little bit of a bio about me that focuses mostly on my education and some pieces of my career, but I want to give you a little bit of a different bio to start today. Let's start at the beginning. This is Carolina Nunez as a, I don't know, maybe like an 8-month-old. I can't tell for sure, maybe even younger than that. I was born here in Provo, which is a pretty common story, I think, for a lot of us. I was born in Provo while my parents were going to college here at BYU, but their path to BYU was a little bit different from perhaps the ordinary story. So my dad is from Venezuela, and he lived and grew up in Venezuela. And when he became college age, his parents really wanted him to have a US education. And they wanted to sort of send him off to see the world, but they were a little bit worried about him. They wanted him to not get into too much trouble. He wanted to be in a good place. And they had heard about this magical kingdom of Provo, where there was no alcohol and there was no premarital sex, and everybody behaved themselves. And so they decided they wanted to send my dad to BYU. And my dad says that his father, my abuelo, my grandfather, told him that he was going to have this amazing experience because he was being sent to a true US party school, and that he would have the amazing party experience that he had seen in Hollywood movies. And I'm hearing my father's voice right now as he tells the story that he then arrived in Provo and couldn't even find a caffeinated Coca-Cola, right? So he was sort of super, super shocked by this. Here at BYU, he met my mother. My mother had grown up in Las Vegas, and there's a picture of her with me as a baby. And they met, they got married, and shortly after that, they graduated from BYU. I was born just after my mom graduated and right before my dad graduated. So I lived in Provo for about a semester, and then we moved to Venezuela, where my dad is from. And that is where I grew up with my two sisters. A few years later, so about 9 years later, my parents decided to get divorced. And I started to spend 9 months of the year in the US with my mom here in, well, partially in Las Vegas and later in Utah, and then 3 months of the year with my dad in Venezuela. And I did that for all of my high school. I did that through college, and I even did that through a little bit of my law school for my first law summer I spent in Venezuela. Along the way, I got married to my sweetheart. This is Kendall, and we sort of joined our lives together and then began the tricky task of balancing our educational goals and aspirations, our careers, and at the end, our family as well. So here are our 3 children, Alex, Bianca, and Daphne. This is at Capitol Reef National Park, and they obviously are an enormous part of my life. And I tell you all of this because I'll talk a little more later, but I think it's really important for us to know more about each other rather than just our professional roles. I think it's very easy to see someone, especially a woman, and imagine all of her career and forget about the other things that are important to her, or imagine that she has had to separate them, right? To sort of box up her life in order to pursue this career. And I have fallen into that trap for much of my career, and I'm trying to get out of that and realize that we are all individuals with lives outside of our careers, that sometimes they cross over and sometimes they're a little more separate. But I think it's important for us to be honest with each other about our interests and our lives outside of our careers. And I'll come back to that a little bit more later. But first, I want to just sort of pose the question to you. Here I have a little slide just with the word leadership. I would love to know, and if you can in the chat, if you can maybe type out what is or has been your biggest obstacle to taking on leadership roles or to meaningfully lead in any sphere. What has been the biggest obstacle for you? You can put those in the chat. Awesome, here they come. Taking on too many commitments at once, commitments about time. Time is a big one, it seems. Fear of failure, another time, pulled in too many directions. Insecurity, a feeling I don't know enough, unprepared or unqualified. Balance and family, other responsibilities, more about time, anxiety, fear of failure and time constraints. Wow, I think we have some themes here. Support, delegating tasks, which relates to time, can't really do everything yourself, feeling unprepared for leading, seeing myself as capable, finding an opportunity that will be enriching and not completely sucking me in if I stop enjoying it. Okay, lots of sort of related themes here. Time, insecurity, balance, being qualified. Those are all things that I'm seeing here. And they're all very much reflected in my own path and my own journey in leadership and in my career. So maybe you will be able to tell from this image what my biggest obstacle to leadership is, and it is imposter syndrome, right? I have looked around my whole life and I have seen, I should have learned what the names of these people are. Are they stormtroopers? I have looked looked around my life and I've seen stormtroopers and I look at myself and I don't fit in. I don't look like them. I don't know what they know. I don't know how to do what they do. And this is the story that I tell myself. And so at the very outset, the first thing I want to talk about today is about imposter syndrome, because I have learned from conversations with my students, from my colleagues, that this is very, very real. And in particular, it can be real, more real for women than it is for men. Study after study shows that women believe they are not competent enough to apply for a job or take on a responsibility, while men often feel more than qualified to take on a responsibility or a position. So I'm just going to cut to the chase on some of these, what I've learned about imposter syndrome's causes. The imposter syndrome for me arises from a misperception about my own skills and strengths, misperceptions about others' skills and strengths, and misperceptions about what it means to be a leader. And here you could substitute a different word, right? To be a lawyer, to be a mother, to be a Relief Society president, to be an in-house counsel, right? You could substitute any word, but misperceptions about what the role that you are looking at is. So again, I'm going to cut to the chase, and then I'll talk a little bit more about all of this. So here's what I've learned about overcoming imposter syndrome. The very first and most important thing for me has been finding good mentors. And here's the catch: trusting them. When a mentor tells me that I am capable, that I am qualified, that I would do a good job on something, I have got to trust her or him. It's not good enough to have just good mentors. You actually have to trust them. You have to prepare to be uncomfortable, which includes failure. And I saw in the chat that this was some concern, right? For many of you, preparing to fail. And you're going to be uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable in every single position that I have ever taken on. And I have failed in some respects. And I want to share some of my failures with you over the next few minutes. Say yes. Once you have good mentors, you're prepared to be uncomfortable. You actually have to say yes to something. And I had a year where I decided to say yes to everything. And a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell you about came from that year of saying yes to everything. And then pay it forward, share yourself. And this actually relates back to what I had mentioned at the very beginning, being transparent about your life and sharing your life, not just your career, but your personal life with others as a mentor, paying it back and helping women and others that are people you are mentoring understand their skills, their strengths, so that they can also take on leadership roles. So that's kind of my framework for imposter syndrome that I want to talk a little more about. So here's a photo of me in my law school carrel at BYU Law School. I went to BYU Law School from 2001 to 2004. And I was really worried about going to law school. I had grown up, as I've sort of shared a little bit about my growing up, I didn't know any lawyers. And in fact, I wasn't really all that familiar with the US legal system at all. It was a shock to me when I came to law school what the common law was and that judges sort of make decisions. In my mind, I had come from a civil code country and I just didn't have any idea of what lawyers did in the US in particular. I was also particularly worried about some cultural norms that I thought I would be stepping out of if I went to law school. I was worried about, I had just been married the year before I would go to law school. And I was really concerned about what people expected about me, about having children, about spending time with my children, and whether law school would be compatible with that. And coming back to those factors about misperceptions, I misperceived myself, my strengths. I misperceived others. I looked at law students and I thought they were very different from me. I thought that they had strengths that I didn't have. I thought they were perfect, that they were amazing, that they were superheroes. And I was wrong. They were amazing people, but they were not super people, right? They didn't have superpowers and I could be like them. And I misperceived what it meant to be a lawyer and what it meant to be a law school. And I went to a professor in undergrad and I sort of poured my soul out to him and I told him all of this. And he looked at me and he said, you can do this. You can do this. You can do this while you have children. You can do this without having children. you're smart enough, you're competent enough, you can do this. And I really credit him for taking the plunge to go to law school and going to BYU Law School, which was a turning point in my life and opened the door to all sorts of opportunities. So that was sort of one of the first places where I had to rely on a mentor, to trust what the mentor told me, to take the plunge and go to law school. So fast forward a few years, this is my second summer, and I've taken a summer job at a fancy New York law firm. And I have to tell you, I had incredible imposter syndrome. I had learned everything I needed to know about New York lawyers from television. And I knew that they were very fancy and that they wore amazing clothes, that they were very put together, that they knew everything about the law. I didn't even know really what a merger was or an acquisition. And frankly, I still don't. It's not my area of law. And I was so nervous. And it was uncomfortable to show up there. It was uncomfortable to show up and take a seat in an office in a skyscraper. It was uncomfortable from day one. And I remember on the first day of orientation for the summer associate position, they told us that the dress was business casual. And so I showed up in what I thought was business casual, but I could tell everyone had decided to dress up far more than I had. And I was already a little bit worried, again, perceiving that I didn't fit in. Lawyers dress better than I do. Lawyers talk about more sophisticated things. The conversation centered on politics and Supreme Court cases. And I wasn't quite there. I wasn't following all of this the way they were. And then they served breakfast and I drank some orange juice. And I was too nervous to eat much more. And frankly, there wasn't really much more to eat. It was sort of a light breakfast. And I started to get hungry as the orientation went on. And we went to lunch to a Pan-Asian restaurant. It had sushi. I'd never eaten sushi in my life or seen sushi before. This was early 2000s. Sushi wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. And I was starving. And I remember somebody ordered some edamame, soybean pods for the table. And I had never seen those either, but I was really hungry. So I reached out and I grabbed one of those edamame pods and I put the whole thing in my mouth. And of course, all of you probably know that you're supposed to very discreetly sort of suck out each little soybean out of the soybean pod because the soybean pod is virtually inedible. And I remember putting it in my mouth thinking, this is like eating wood, like a tree branch. This is really weird. Why would people eat this? And I ate it and no one said a word. And then I did it again. I ate another one. So here I am, probably the center of attention, people just trying not to look at me, eating these edamame because I'm not sophisticated enough to know how to do this. And I was really mortified when finally somebody took an edamame and started eating it the way that everybody would eat soybeans out of a soybean pod. And at that moment, it was like all of everything coming together telling me, lawyers know how to do this. You don't. You are not smart enough. You are not sophisticated enough to be a lawyer. All of those misperceptions about myself. But I pushed through it, the discomfort. And one of the partners at the law firm took me under his wing and told me that I was good enough. He was very impressed with me. And that was everything. I had to trust him, or I think I might have gone home. I might have gotten on a flight and gone back to Utah. So another instance of being uncomfortable, kind of a funny one that had to teach me to rely on mentors who told me that I could do this. Another time when I relied on a mentor was a few years ago. I was asked to give a devotional address at BYU, and I frankly would have said no. I had said no. I've said no to so many things. I think in the opening address, Annette Jarvis mentioned that she has a hard time saying no, right? That she says yes. I say no all the time, and it's out of this insecurity that I don't fit, that I'm not qualified, that there are better people out there to do this job. And I remember telling the dean of the law school, Gordon Smith, I'd been asked to give a devotional, and I don't know. I might not be in town. I don't know if I'm the right person to give the devotional. And he was very clear with me. He looked at me and he said, you can do this. And I think you're going to do great. And I'm so grateful that I trusted him, because this was one of the most meaningful experiences of my career, which is so strange, right? That this 20-minute talk that you can give could be so meaningful. But I would have missed out on that if I had not trusted him. And also if it had not been my year of saying yes. It was the year where I had said I would say yes to everything. And I learned that I could overcome this anxiety that I had about public speaking. Again, trusting my mentors has just been so big for me. And when that very same mentor, this is Gordon Smith, asked me to be an associate dean, which actually happened before this devotional, I almost said no to that as well. I could not imagine myself being a leader at the law school. I couldn't imagine myself hiring adjuncts, making the curriculum for the law school, deciding what law students needed in their education, deciding sometimes whether students needed to be readmitted if they had actually been, if they had to drop out of the law school. Lots of decisions that seem out of my capacity, my capability, that because I trusted a mentor, I took them on despite the discomfort. And so I'm really grateful for mentors who have told me about strengths that I don't even recognize in myself. Another instance in trusting mentors, this is a picture of a bunch of students. Some of you are actually here in the conference right now. This is a picture that was taken in Dilley, Texas. This is Bobby's Tacos. And Bobby took this picture for us, makes good tacos, also takes good pictures. And we were here as part of the Refugee and Immigration Initiative. We were visiting detainees, women and children detained at the South Texas Family Residential Center, which is an immigration detention center for women and their children. The vast majority of these women and children are escaping violence in Central America. And I had been thinking about doing this for a few years. As soon as the Obama administration had announced some more stringent rules for asylum seekers coming from Central America, I had thought about taking students to the border to help women prepare for what's called a credible fear interview. And it's sort of the beginning step of an application for asylum. It's like a threshold determination that either results in the woman and her children being able to pursue an asylum claim in the United States or being deported back to their country of origin. And I had all these fears about it, about not being qualified enough to do this, about not having the time. It would require me being away from my family for about 10 days at a time. And it was another mentor, another professor at the law school, Kif Augustine Adams, who said, let's just do this. Let's go and take students, but first let's go ourselves, Professor Augustine Adams and I. Let's go and see what this is all about. And I said yes to her. She is a mentor and has been since I've been a law student. And it was an incredible life-changing experience. And I can't imagine the absence of that. If I had said no, or had ignored this mentor, or had let my discomfort and my insecurities make the decision for me, I would have a very different career and even life now. This was very life-changing for me to do this. And I wanted my students to have that experience. And so I took on that role, the leadership role of guiding students and taking students to have this experience in Southern Texas. And it has been one of the most fulfilling pieces of my journey. So getting over this first step of imposter syndrome takes me to what I've learned about leadership. When I've said yes and when I've taken on leadership roles, this is what I've learned. For me, my definition of leadership is inspiring members of the community to recognize and leverage their strengths in pursuit of a common vision. And there are a lot of pieces to this. A community could be anything from, it could be a group of siblings in the wake of a parent's death. It could be a classroom. For me right now, that's the most salient community right now is my class. It could be your relief society. It could be another organization that you're involved with. It could be your family, right? A community takes many different shapes and forms. And helping people recognize their own strengths is kind of one of the things that helps me, right, get over imposter syndrome. and leverage those, use those to pursue this common vision. To do that, I've learned a couple of things that have been very important for me. The first is to love my community, and that seems probably so obvious, but it has taken work, and I'll share a little bit about sort of my failures in loving my community and being honest and transparent. And sometimes that requires giving tough feedback for the members in your community when you take on a leadership role. So as I was thinking about good leaders, I thought about Luke. This is Luke, and he was a guide for a trip to the top of Mount Rainier that my husband and I took. And this is not something that I would just do on my own. My husband really wanted to do this, and I said, fine, let's go to the top of Mount Rainier, despite the fact that I don't like snow, that I don't like cold, that I don't like camping, all of which are included in this great Mount Rainier experience. But Luke was a really interesting leader that I thought a lot of what he did fit that definition that I have described of inspiring your community members to recognize and leverage their own strengths and skills in pursuit of a common vision. Of course, our group, which included my husband, included me, and other people, our common vision was to get to the top of Mount Rainier. And of course, that's partially weather dependent. You can't control everything, but you can make a real go of it. And Luke was very good at recognizing our strengths that we wouldn't recognize. And it took some observation. The very first day of this experience, we just sat around in our group packing our bags together. And Luke here would walk around and see how we were responding to the instructions of the kinds of things that we need, or we should get rid of this, we should get rid of that, and was looking at how we had prepared, what we had brought with us. And based on that, he had 3 sort of subgroup leaders. He put us with some of his subgroup leaders. These were experienced mountaineers. And then he watched us on the first day, which was just a slog through the snow. That's all it was. It wasn't even that big of an incline. It was a slog through the snow. And he watched us then to figure out how he would pair us, because for the final day, we would have to be in pairs. Actually, yes, in pairs plus a guide on a rope. And you're kind of tied together, right? If one falls, you likely all partially fall, and you all have to kind of arrest your fall with your ice axe. And so he was observing that, and he paired us all. And he paired probably the member of our team that was the weakest with the strongest guide and the other strongest member of the team. So he was very, very adept at figuring out how to make groups that would work. And he was good at being honest and transparent. I remember when we got to the very last place that we were going to sleep before going to the summit, he looked at us and he said, okay, the fun is over. This is where it gets dangerous. And you're going to have to listen to me. And this is the feedback I have for you. And he told us how he thought we were doing, and he took us individually and told us about our skill level, and again, paired us up to be in those ropes. And I remember that night I cried in my tent, because that was some really hard feedback and some really harsh realities. He told us about what the risks were on the mountain, and I was very, very nervous about it. The last day came and we started going up, and I wasn't feeling it. I was feeling kind of sick. I had some altitude sickness, and I would have frankly have been relieved if Luke had just come to me and said, you know what, I don't think you're prepared for this. I don't think you can make it to the top. I would have liked to have just gone down. And so I kind of kept giving Luke every opportunity for him to send me back down the mountain. And he finally looked at me and he said, you can do this. I know you can do this. And I'm not going to let you out of it. You will have to affirmatively just tell me you want to go down if you want to go down, but I'm not going to send you down because I know you can do this. And that was that. I trusted him as my mentor. And one of the reasons that I trusted him was because I knew that he would tell me to go back down if he thought I couldn't do it. How did I know that? Because he had to do that with someone else in our group. We had someone in our group whose footwork just wasn't quite right, was causing some risk for the whole group. And in fact, on the way down, when he did turn around, he almost fell into a crevasse because he was just too tired to keep going. And thankfully, a guide was roped to him and arrested his fall, and everyone was okay at the end of that. But I knew that I could trust him precisely because he was willing to give honest feedback. And that is one of the hardest things to do, I think, as a leader. And I think about that in my classroom. I think about that as associate dean. Sometimes I have had to tell students, this is not up to par, right? Or research assistants. You have to change something that you're doing so that you can reach your full potential. And because I'm willing to do that, I think I can be a good mentor to students, to colleagues, younger colleagues, newer colleagues, because they know I will tell them if they are not capable or if they need to make changes. Oh, that's me. I'm smiling, but mostly I'm terrified inside that I'm going to fall down this mountain. So some experiences as a leader with students at BYU Law. One of the things I mentioned was to love my community. And this really is only possible if you get to know your community. And for me, that has meant getting to know my community, my students, my colleagues individually. And as I was associate dean and I realized that this was an important piece of being a good leader, I decided that I wanted to make more efforts to get to know my students. And so I created this assignment, getting to know you assignment, that I asked all of my tort students, this was for first year torts, to fill out. And it was asking them about their personal lives, how they had spent the summer. And they turned this in, and here's a failure of mine. I did not read those until the very end of the semester. I just kept putting it off because I didn't have time. And I learned so much about my students and felt so badly about not having read it before, because it would have changed the way I taught my students. It would have changed the way I approached my students. And I left it to the very end. And I had this particular sting when I read one of these assignments and the student told me about a name that he preferred to go by. And I didn't know that because I didn't read it till the end. And the whole semester I had called him by not the name that he had preferred to go by. But I learned from that mistake. And fast forward to another torts class. And I did the same assignment, and I decided that I would respond to every single getting to know you assignment, talk about our common interests, highlight some things that I thought that person did well in class, etc. Respond to every single one. And it has completely changed the way I think about my class. It's completely changed the way that I can give individual feedback in my class. It's easier to give hard feedback because I think the student knows that I know him or her and love him or her. So it's been a really, really good experience for me to learn how to love and how to demonstrate that love to my students. And it does absolutely take time. A lot of this takes time. And I noticed that was one of the concerns that many of you had in the chat box. And so with time and other responsibilities, here's what I've learned about balance. The first piece is that balance is a long game. I think we often think that we have to be balanced every moment of every day, that every day is a balancing act. And the reality is that there is a season, there's a time and a season for everything. And instead of thinking about every day being some kind of perfect balance, I think it helps to think about a career, a lifetime, a trajectory for that balance. Sometimes you're going to focus on one part of your life more than the other, and that will ebb and flow over the years. And this is especially true if you're balancing more than one career in your family. I have found that with my husband, it's an ebb and a flow, and it has worked out perhaps miraculously that when my husband has a high level of responsibility in his job, I oftentimes have flexibility. And when I have had a high level of responsibility in my job, my husband has had flexibility. And that is what it takes, is sort of the ebb and flow of this idea of balance. And sometimes balance is a little bit of a myth altogether. Sometimes it's more about integrating rather than balancing. And I learned a lot about this during the pandemic. During the pandemic, it was impossible to balance because everything came crashing down on me at once. I had 3 children who were at home and were not at school. I had a class to teach, and I was in the middle of planning the next academic year for the law school. And I had to reimagine what a COVID year would look like. And I had to comply with university policies, and I had to comply with state policies and guidelines. And it was all at the same time. And I was also trying to figure out what our students needed who had suddenly been cut off, right, from their classes. Some of them were having trouble finding ways to get home. Some of them didn't have toilet paper. Some of them didn't have, had just lost their jobs. Some of them, their law firms had just rescinded their offers for their jobs after graduation. All of this was coming down at me at once. And I was trying so hard to focus on the law school and then kind of shove that aside and focus on my children who were in this great state of uncertainty and who had none of their regular social network with their classmates and their teachers. And I finally realized that this was an illusion to keep all of this separate. That if my children walked behind me in a Zoom window, that was okay. And that if I had to talk to my family at the dinner time table about what I was doing and how I was envisioning the school year during COVID, that was okay too. And it turned out that this was something that I thought I should actually replicate in my life, regardless of this pandemic, was to integrate my life a little bit more. And one of the things that I did while I was home with my kids and teaching online, I needed to keep my children from, I don't know, getting in fights and wasting their day. And I thought, you know what, they can actually help me create content for my law school class. I was teaching immigration law at the time, and I decided to involve them in making videos every week for my immigration law class. And I want to show you one of them just so that I can show you this idea of integrating children, my family, something that was important to me, into my career. So I did this Monday newsroom where my children did immigration related news that I would show to my students. So let me show you that, and let me talk a little bit about what happened after I shared these videos. And hopefully I've clicked all the right things to share sound, but stop me if you can't hear it.
Hard-hitting news in child-sized sound bites. The news you need to start your immigration law class right. Semi-informed commentary and opinions. Alex Hewlett and Bianca Hewlett bring you news that you can mostly trust on the Monday Newsroom.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday Newsroom. How was your weekend, Bianca?
It was fantastic. We got a new cat, but you already knew that because, well, you live with me.
Yes, I know. We do live with each other. That's kind of obvious. Now, the news.
The United States is sending kids caught at the U.S.-Mexico border back to their home countries. This is a new policy. Kids used to be put into detention centers or sent to foster families, but the government is worried about spreading COVID-19.
But Trump hasn't released children from immigration detention centers yet. A few days ago, a judge in California asked the federal government to give one good reason for keeping children in detention during the pandemic. It seems like it would be a good idea to release children if the government is so worried about COVID-19 that it is returning children who arrive alone on the southern border.
But royalty, however, don't seem to have a problem getting across the border. Princess Meghan and Prince Harry just moved to Los Angeles, where Princess Meghan plans to go back to acting. Since Meghan is a U.S. citizen, she should be able to get the paperwork for Prince Harry to become a resident. Our reporter, Daphne Hewlett, is on location in L.A.
Yes, Bianca, I'm here in sunny Los Angeles where Prince Harry and Princess Meghan are trying to figure out if they want to be United States residents and citizens at all. Staying in the United States means they have to pay U.S. taxes, and Meghan and Harry don't like paying taxes. That sounds pretty American to me. Now do you, Alex?
Speaking of VIPs, there are a lot of other VIPs in California that have suddenly shown up on the government's radar. Immigrant farm workers, most of them undocumented, have been picking and processing our food for years. Now, with the pandemic, the government said they are essential workers and gave them paperwork so they can keep working throughout the pandemic. Even though they have papers and status as essential workers, they are still undocumented under immigration laws.
Well, that's it for today. Tune in next week for the Monday Newsroom.
See you next week.
So one of the unexpected things that came of this was that my students began to ask me more about my personal life. And I think this kind of sharing with my students help them understand, and maybe you discover for the very first time in something more than an abstract way that I was a parent and that I had kids and that I had a husband and a pet cat that we just got for the first time, as announced in the Monday newsroom, a COVID cat. And that I did things other than teach them, and I did things other than write law review articles. And my students were so much more, they saw themselves as lawyers better because they understood that they could have other lives and other interests. And so I started to do things like this in all my classes. And now I always start, particularly in my torts class for first year law students, I start the week on Monday with Ask Me Anything. And they often ask me about my family. They ask me sort of questions about life and the universe. They ask me how to manage curly hair or whether this will be on the exam. They ask me all sorts of things. But I think that they are able to see themselves in a way that they couldn't when I was trying to essentially hide my family from my students or my colleagues, because I felt that in some way that might discredit me. And so that story that Annette Jarvis shared in that opening remarks about having one of her kids pick up the phone, and after hearing a male voice saying, "Dad," right? And she said it kind of softened the conversation a little bit for a negotiation that she had. I think that can do so much for our younger generation of lawyers and women in the law, just seeing that we have other interests. And so that was that last piece of that slide where I said you have to pay it forward to get over imposter syndrome. So I said, have good mentors and trust them, prepare to be uncomfortable, say yes, and then pay it forward. We have to share of ourselves, and that doesn't just mean our career and leadership roles, it means all of us. And that is what will allow others to feel more comfortable taking on leadership roles. So that's all I have for you, but I'd be happy to take questions or comments or hear your thoughts. But thanks again for the opportunity to do this.
If there are questions for Carolina, you can speak it out or put it in the chat.
This is Lori. I'm sorry I can't go on. I've got a painter here today, and I'm watching, but I can't be on in person. So anyway, yeah. So it's about the immigration issue, and I've been, I've got a lot of feelings about what's happening right now. It's like we have this. It seems like a lawless situation at the border. Just there's the president is not enforcing the law, and I understand about helping people that have crossed the border and they're there, and so on. And I personally have been involved in Boise, where I was living for a number of years, with refugee communities from Africa, especially, doing a lot to help them and just take the kids places, take them to Boise State games, take them to the circus, just do things with them and so on. So, and plus I speak Spanish. I went on mission to Chile and I'm fluent, and I engage with a lot of Hispanics and so on. But I don't know what your philosophy is on what's happening now, or on the whole concept of citizenship. And so, because that falls into the doctrine of the church too, the idea of citizenship, that you have to conform to certain things to belong to the church and to the body of Christ and so on. So anyway, just I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, so I do a lot of you should come to, I do a lot of discussions about immigration law and citizenship, and would be happy to have you join, Lori, at some point. I don't know, I mean, if my overall philosophy is that families should stay together and people who are running away from serious violence deserve our help. And so that's sort of where I've really put all of my efforts in the last few years. But I'm always happy to talk in another situation, in another setting, about immigration law, how immigration law works, how it's changed over the years. I do lots of presentations about that in other contexts, but I understand what you're saying, and would love to have that discussion some other time.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Somebody?
I have a question. So sometimes, Caroline, I try and convince myself that I don't have imposter syndrome. However, sometimes I believe that I do, because I was a non-traditional student in law school. I already had 4 kids. My oldest was in high school. My youngest was in elementary by the time I graduated from law school. My oldest had moved out and had his own child. And so I was what I classify myself as a nona, not a grandma, a nona. I'm too young to be a grandma right now. And so I often felt as though, because I was a non-traditional student and a lot of the other law students were much younger than me with no responsibility like the responsibility that I had. And my husband also worked overseas. So I was also a married single mom in law school. So that made things a little bit challenging. And now getting out of law school and going into my profession, because I didn't start law school until later on in life, and starting my profession, in which I just opened my own law practice last year, I have found that I still kind of look at myself as not being in a place that I can compete with some of the younger generation. And it's not that I don't believe in myself and I don't know that I have the ability. It's just that I'm like, okay, well, I could almost be some of these kids' parent. And so it has made it a little bit more challenging for me to kind of get past that concept within myself and realize that I do have the abilities and that I do have the bandwidth to be able to thrive as an attorney, where I can really still focus, because now my oldest is 26 and my youngest is 16, and just kind of helping myself realize that I still have it in me, even though I did things a little bit later on in life. And so I just wanted to know, and then also I think I've been having a challenge in just really finding mentors that I felt could relate to my experiences. And so I just wanted to get your opinion on how to be able to help get past this area that I'm in.
Yeah, so first, congratulations on starting your own law practice. That is no small feat. And I hope you're gaining confidence through that, even though I'm sure there are lots of challenges along the way. And the first thing I sort of go back to, you talk about sort of the younger generation. You might be misperceiving the younger generation a little bit. They're great, but you have a lot to offer as someone who has more maturity and more life experience. One of the things that I kind of wish sometimes, I graduated from law school, I was 23? No, couldn't be. Actually, no, 25. I was 25, I think. And I felt so immature and knew it. I didn't really have any good judgment, to be honest. I mean, I was just kind of trying to role model what people told me to do. And I feel so much more able now. I feel like if I could go back and practice law, so I haven't practiced law for a while because I've been teaching, as a more mature person, that I have a lot to offer. And I think that you have to recognize what you have to offer given the differences. I think we often think that we need to blend in, we need to be the same as everybody else, but draw on what sets you apart. I am pretty sure that a client is going to would prefer to speak to someone with more life experience than to somebody just freshly out of law school in a solo law practice. So I think you bring a lot to the table. As far as mentors I think is really challenging. It can be very hard to find mentors. And sometimes you are not going to find a mentor that has the same life experience that you do. And I think this is a reality for us as women, especially when there are so few women in positions of law firm management, for example, and elsewhere, right? We're going to have to be mentored by people who do not necessarily share our life experience. And I have had great mentors who have similar experience to me and mentors who don't. And at the end of the day, there isn't anyone out there, right, that is just like me. And so you've got to start where you can, and you've got to find a mentor, even if that mentor doesn't have the same kind of life experience. I think JRCLS can be a place for that. Finding people here in this community, your local bar can be a place. There's usually a women in law kind of organization within the local bar. And I would start there. I have heard great advice from women in the law through the Utah Bar organization. I have had great advice from colleagues. And I get it that when you're practicing on your own, you may take a little bit more outreach, but I would say don't discount people that don't have all of the same challenges or strengths that you have. They still can be good mentors to you.
Well,
Can you take
unfortunately,
one more question?
yes, one more question. That'd be great.
Yeah. Hi. So I love your, integrating stuff, and you are able to integrate your family, especially the children. My question is on how you can integrate with your husband. So I got married when I was 40, and at that time I was a lot of things going for me as a lawyer already, and I married someone who is not a lawyer. So any advice on that sort of integration?
I think, I think every relationship is different. So the kind of integration that you might have with your husband might look very different from the integration that I would have with my husband. I got married very, very young. And so my husband was sort of integrated in the whole law school experience all along the way. And so he's been able to sort of follow that. But even in the absence of that, we do play kind of, we do get involved in each other's careers quite a bit. I'm a lawyer and I'm paranoid about what he writes in emails. So he often says, Carolina, can you read this email and tell me if I've got any missteps or if there's something that you think I should change in this email, right? And then when I'm setting up a PowerPoint, I have him come look over it. He looked over this whole PowerPoint before I presented it today and gave me sort of advice and talked about things. So I think sharing of your career can be really helpful. At the same time, there can be too much, right? Spouses don't want to just hear about each other's workday all day, every day, right? You have to have something, at least for us, something that we can come back to that is just sort of ours, our relationship. We enjoy traveling, we enjoy watching movies, whatever that might be for you. So it's an interesting balance, and it will be unique for the relationship. But I would say don't hesitate to try bringing each other in to sort of the substance of your careers. And I get that being a lawyer, sometimes there are confidentiality concerns. So there are some things that are not really shareable, but to the extent that you can, I think it can be fun.